I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes talking about the Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. And you'll see on the in this module, you'll notice that we give you a link to download this act, and also we would like you to take a look at it. It is rather lengthy. It is passed by Congress. So that means it's a pretty complicated document. But there's a couple of key components that I really wanted to just go over briefly with the Stafford Act. It actually was created after a series of tornadoes in the Midwest, and I think that it was actually created or promulgated in 1974. And the families were screaming for assistance. And there was no program available. There was no means of providing assistance. And so the local legislative people came to Congress, and they said that we need to do something. It was an act started in the Senate, and it passed the Senate 91-0. It passed the House, and there was some 392-0 because of these floods in the 70s. And the floods were along the Mississippi River, and it was just devastating. So it actually was signed into law on in May 22nd, 1974, and the idea was to start providing assistance to people that were struck by disaster. And in the beginning, they were just thinking about natural disasters. So let's take a look at what happened to the Stafford Act over the years. It's basically Disaster Relief Act said that the disaster had to be authorized by the president to establish a program of disaster preparedness. The federal assistance is contingent upon a presidential declaration, which we saw earlier about the process, which we're going to see again in another second. The act authorized the president to direct any federal agency, with or without reimbursement, to utilize its available personnel, equipment, supplies, facilities, and other resources in support of state and local disaster assistance efforts. Keep in mind that FEMA was just still kind of a really something that was thought about, and there really was no one federal agency that was in charge. There was about 10 or 15 agencies involved in when there was a disaster. Each one was called upon by the president to do certain things, and they responded and obviously did it when the president called. So the federal and state disaster relief operations are conducted on a partnership, and federal assistance supports local, tribal, and state activities and resources. You will never see federal assistance go to local entities without going through the state first, and you would never see locals asking for the disaster promulgation without going to a state first, and that's an important component. Of course, along comes some changes and what was happening, and we had the amendment of the Disaster Relief Act. There was some concern about the use of disaster authority for responding to non-natural disasters. And the disasters they were thinking about at that time was 3 Mile Island had just happened. And they were concerned about how they could help the people from affected by this nuclear incident, 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, and also the Cuban refugee influx. All of these people released from jail, sent to the United States, all types of criminals that were put on boats and shipped here, and we had no idea if they were criminals or not, what their records were, and Florida basically had this huge influx, and they were screaming for help to the federal government to help them pay for this. It is quite expensive. So there was bipartisan legislation, passed the House, it passed the Senate by the voice vote. It was that strongly supported, and in 1988, the new law was put into effect. And let's see what it did. It provides a framework for continued disaster relief and provided the authority of FEMA. Now we have FEMA in the mix, role in managing disaster assistance, put a minimum of 75-25 share. That's the first time we see that share in there, and it's still in there today. refocus assistance for non-natural disasters caused by fire, flood, or explosion. And again, you still don't see that word terrorism yet. Placed importance on individual assistance. We want to help the individuals that were affected by the disaster. State, tribal, and local governments have a primary responsibility to respond, and then the federal government is there to assist the states or assist the tribal, because they are considered to be an individual nation. Typically, federal assistance, it will trickle down to the local governments, but in reality, federal goes to state, state goes to local. And FEMA may task any federal agency without reimbursement to provide assistance to the state, tribal, or local governments. So that was a major addition to the Stafford Act. They also included in the Stafford Act, that this change, individual assistance in the form of individual and household grants, temporary housing, grants for emergency work, repair, restoration, and debris removal. That was new. It was not paid for before. And mitigation grants. And the idea was, here it is, 1988, and we've already got the picture in our mind that we need to do something so that this disaster doesn't happen again. So if we're going to give you money to recover from the disaster, we want you to recover in a way that we don't have to pay for it again and again and again. And this was around in the 80s. We move forward. Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000 now moves forward. It was a bipartisan legislation, passed overwhelmingly 415 to 2, passed the Senate by unanimous consent, and it was signed in on 10/30/2000, signed into Public Law 106-390. Notice the date, October 30th, 2000. What had just happened, prior to that? And so it was funding for pre-disaster mitigation activities, developing experimental multi-hazard maps to better understand the risk, establish state and local government infrastructure mitigation planning, define how states can assume more responsibility in managing hazard mitigation grant program, and adjusting the ways in which management costs for projects are funded. So right after that, we begin realizing that pets are a problem for us. So again, there's an act proposed that we need to worry about evacuation and transportations. So it passed the Senate unanimously, bipartisan legislation in the House, largely in response to the abandonment of many pets and other animals during Hurricane Katrina. Notice the date, 10/6/06. And requires the director of FEMA to ensure that every state and local emergency addresses a plan for pets. It also said the Federal Emergency Management Agency is the primary federal agency, provides supplemental aid to states. Events that cause disasters include natural events such as hurricanes, tornadoes, storms, volcano eruptions, landslides, snowstorms, droughts, regardless of cause, fires, floods, and explosions. And the intent of the Stafford Act is the federal assistance be supplemental. Key words, supplemental to local, state, and private relief organizations. FEMA is always going to be the money of last resort. You better use your insurance. You better use your savings. You better use everything else you have, and then you make it to FEMA for help. We also, a little bit about the Stafford Act, some of the major components you're going to see. Individual household assistance, helping individuals recover. Public assistance, helping the city, towns recover. Like the flooding in Sandy, the train or the subway stations that were flooded. Who paid for all that restoration? You and I paid 75%, and the state of New York or the city of New York paid the other 25%. Disaster unemployment assistance. So if you lose your job, we can actually give you unemployment assistance for an extended period of time till your company gets up and running or you get a job. Hazard mitigation, again, trying to eliminate the hazard so we don't have to keep paying for it. And crisis counseling is new, that we finally realized that we needed to start helping people deal with what was happened from a disaster. That was new. Declaration process, we saw this earlier. There's a local incident happens, they call for assistance. The FEMA local region sends in a preliminary damage assessment team. That report goes to the governor. The governor says, yes, I need help. The governor requests it from the president. The president gives a declaration. FEMA designates which area will get assistance, usually by county. It could be New Haven County, it could be Hartford County. You pick the counties, and usually when a particular county gets the aid, all the counties that touch it or surround it also get the aid. So the president appoints a federal coordinating officer who has the authority to agree or disagree to any kind of funding request that comes in. Typically, a state makes a state coordinating officer who works with the federal coordinating officer, and then FEMA dispatches its disaster response teams and assets to provide support for a mission assignment. And the National Response Plan is actually response framework is what they're going to use, and they bring in some departments for assistance. Criteria used by FEMA: the amount and type of damage, the impact on the infrastructure, imminent threats to public health and safety, impacts on essential government services. If you no longer have a town hall, if you no longer have a fire station, which happened in Gulfport, Mississippi, the government will come in and help you get that up and running again as quick as possible. So those are some of the things that FEMA uses to say, yeah, you need some help if you no longer have fire protection. Individual assistance, it opens disaster assistance centers where individuals go. They can apply for FEMA funding, and the Small Business Administration. We will see more about the SBA a little bit later. There are two types of aid. Immediate, they can give debit cards, usually around $2,500, and you need to show them what you're spending the money on. In New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, they were handing out the credit cards or debit cards like candy, and people were coming back the next day and asking, hey, this is good, I need another one. Yeah, well, they were spending the money on things that shouldn't have been spent on, like alcohol and women, hard to believe. So they could do immediate assistance like that, and then short-term help, finding you a place to live, getting you an apartment, whatever needs to do, or even giving you a trailer on your property so you could rebuild your home. Typically, this is important, individual assistance works very fast. Usually starts 3 to 4 days after the disaster strikes. That's about the quickest you can expect them to arrive. And then public assistance comes a little bit later. It supports states, counties, towns, and nonprofit organizations. It covers items not insured or insurable and after Small Business Administration. So you have to apply to the SBA if you're a nonprofit organization to get a loan before you can get the FEMA. And if SBA says, you don't qualify for a loan, then you go directly to FEMA. The funding takes longer. Typically, a state would actually spend the money, get things repaired, and go to FEMA later to get their money reimbursed for their expenses. Some of the things that FEMA will actually open up when a disaster occurs, and FEMA has a lot of acronyms, and I apologize, but there's a ton of them. They have the National Response Coordination Center, which is in FEMA headquarters in Washington, D.C. It runs 24 hours a day and watches disasters all over the world, specifically the United States. And then there's the Regional Response Coordination Centers. FEMA has 10 regions, which is the next slide. And every one of those regions has a regional coordination center. Here in Region 1 in New England, ours is in Braintree, Massachusetts. FEMA Operations Center is located at Mount Weather Emergency Assistance Center, and then there's 6 mobile emergency response support operations centers. And the 6 mobile emergency response support are called MERS. These vehicles have the ability to communicate or tie together any 2 frequencies that exist at an incident. They can get those working together. And then there's the Operations Center, the Mobile Operations Center located in the states of Massachusetts, Maryland, Georgia, Texas, and Washington. And these are actually brought out during a disaster. These are the 10 regions. Region 2 is probably unique. New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. And you can see the elephant in the room there is New York. And they're probably going to consume anything that's available in that region. Disaster response teams, and these are some other things that FEMA has available for us. Emergency response teams, the national, they respond, they'll come in, they can help you do, basically manage an incident. They don't take it over, they help you manage the incident. And then there's emergency response teams, advanced, they're called ERT-A. These actually come in and help a state. Typically, a small state like Connecticut, if you go to the State Emergency Operations Center, they may have 1 or 2 people deep in a particular position. If you asked for an ERT-A, they would arrive before the disaster actually strikes, if it's a hurricane or something that you could predict is arriving, and they help work in the State Emergency Operations Center helping the government. There's the Federal Incident Response Support Teams, again, that can come in and help manage the incident. The Hurricane Liaison Team that can arrive and help you recover after a hurricane. There's the Urban Search and Rescue Task Forces. There's a number of these across the United States. They will respond if requested, and they will search every home, every building, every business, and they will search the buildings to make sure that there's no injured people left. You'll probably have seen them work in Haiti or in other international disasters and earthquakes. You'll hear them talking about a Fairfax County urban search and rescue team, and that is a federal team, and it can be used anywhere in the United States, or they actually send it around the world. And the Mobile Emergency Response Support, MERS, I've already mentioned. So these are some of the things that you'll see in the Stafford Act. I just covered, I think, the things that I think are really important in the Stafford Act. Take a look at it, download it, and get a good idea. It is a document that Congress approves, so it's probably going to be a little bit hard to read. But I hope that this short presentation on the Stafford Act will help you.